Blood is sticky. People forget that. They think it runs like water washing away clean under a wet rag, but it dries like cheap glue. Sadie knew this because she was currently scrubbing rust-colored stains out of the grout in a club's VIP bathroom. Her knees ached. Ammonia burned her nostrils. Then a heavy leather shoe stepped onto her hand. A shadow swallowed the fluorescent light. A calloused hand snatched the worn photograph slipping from her apron pocket. Why, a voice grated low and heavy as iron, do you have a picture of me? Neon light from the alleyway bled through the frosted glass block window, painting the bathroom tiles in sickly shades of magenta. Sadie kept her breathing shallow. The air in here always tasted like cheap bleach and old sweat no matter how hard she scrubbed. She was 23, and the cartilage in her knees already clicked when she walked. Look at me. The command didn't echo. It didn't need to. It was spoken with the quiet, flat certainty of a man who had never been ignored in his adult life. Sadie froze her fingers still cramped around the stiff bristles of her scrub brush. Her gaze traveled up from the scuffed toe of the leather Oxford, pinning her rag to the floor. Up past charcoal-grey trousers that cost more than her annual rent. Up to the face of Roman Vargo. He wasn't handsome in the way men in magazines were. His face was a geography of old violence, a nose broken at least twice and set poorly. A faint pale scar slicing through his left eyebrow. He smelled of bitter espresso ozone and the sharp metallic tang of gunpowder that lingered just beneath his expensive cologne. Right now he was staring at the crumpled square of glossy Kodak paper pinched between his thick fingers. Sadie's stomach plummeted. Acid burned the back of her throat. She had pinned that photo inside her apron pocket with a rusty safety pin. The fabric must have torn when she hoisted the heavy mop bucket over the threshold. I asked you a question, Roman said. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. He merely shifted his weight. The leather of his shoe ground her damp rag harder against the tile. Sadie tried to swallow, but her mouth had gone completely dry. Her tongue felt like sandpaper. She squeezed her eyes shut. She hated herself in this moment. She wanted to be the tough, unbreakable girl who spat in the face of danger. Instead, her chin trembled, and a hot, humiliating wave of nausea washed over her. It fell. I can see it fell, Roman replied. He squatted down, the fabric of his suit pants pulled taut. He was suddenly too close. The sheer physical mass of him ate up the oxygen in the cramped bathroom. I want to know why a bucket girl at my club is carrying around a candid photograph of me from 10 years ago. He turned the photo around. It was a 4x6 print dog-eared and creased in the middle, the colors fading into a nostalgic yellowish hue. In the foreground of the image, a younger Roman stood on a rainy sidewalk lighting a cigarette. His collar was turned up against the wind. Sadie's heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against her ribs. Thump, thump, thump. She pushed herself back on her hands, the damp, dirty water from the floor soaking into the cheap denim of her jeans. Please give it back. Her voice sounded pathetic, thin and reedy. Roman's eyes flicked from the photo to her face. They were a dull, flat brown, like old pennies. Who sent you? Nobody. Are you taking pictures of my routine? He tilted his head. The overhead fluorescent bulb flickered, buzzing like an angry wasp. You were cop-fed. A harsh, jagged bark of laughter forced its way out of Sadie's throat before she could stop it. The absurdity of it temporarily overrode her terror. She lifted a hand, gesturing to her stained, oversized T-shirt, her messy hair tied back with a frayed rubber band, the yellow dish gloves currently shielding her raw, cracked skin. Do I look like a fed? Roman didn't smile. He reached out and grabbed her upper arm. His grip was entirely devoid of gentleness. It wasn't a warning. It was a vice. Get up, he said. He hauled her to her feet. The sudden change in elevation made Sadie's head spin. Black spots danced in her peripheral vision. She stumbled, her rubber-soled sneakers squeaking violently against the wet linoleum. Roman didn't let her fall, but he didn't coddle her either. He kept his grip firm, marching her out of the bathroom and into the long, dark hallway that led to the back offices of the Copper Lounge. The heavy bass of the music upstairs vibrated through the concrete walls. Thud, thud, thud. It felt like walking inside a massive, dying heart. Sadie's mind raced. If he took her into the basement, she was dead. People went into Roman Vargo's basement when they stole from him or when they talked to the wrong people. They didn't come back up. "I'm just a cleaner," she gasped out, struggling to keep pace with his long strides. Her shoulder burned where he held her. "My name is Sadie. I've worked here for 8 months. Check the payroll, please." "Shut up," Roman said, pushing open a heavy oak door at the end of the hall. Not the basement, the office. Sadie let out a shaky, pathetic breath of relief. She hated her own cowardice, but as he shoved her inside and the heavy door clicked shut behind them, cutting off the thumping bass from upstairs, she knew she was at least going to live for 5 more minutes. The office was freezing. The air conditioning rattled loudly from a vent in the ceiling, blowing Arctic air over a massive, cluttered mahogany desk. The room smelled of old cigar smoke and lemon polish. There were no windows. Roman let go of her arm. Sadie stumbled forward, catching herself on the back of a tufted leather armchair. She stood there, chest heaving, wiping her sweaty palms against her thighs. She left a wet, dirty handprint on the leather. She stared at it, hyperfixating on the smudge to avoid looking at the man locking the door. "Sit," Roman ordered. He didn't wait to see if she obeyed. He walked around the desk, shucking off his suit jacket and tossing it over a chair. He wore a dark button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. Dense dark hair dusted his skin, disappearing beneath a heavy silver watch. He tossed the crumpled photograph onto the center of his desk. Sadie didn't sit. She couldn't. If she sat, her legs would stop working entirely. She stood rigidly behind the chair, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the leather trim. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Roman said. He leaned his hands on the desk. He didn't reach for a gun. He didn't need to. The threat was implicit in the heavy slope of his shoulders, the unblinking stare. "Who paid you to follow me?" "No one," Sadie said. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tasting bile. "I don't follow you. I didn't even know it was you until 2 months ago." Roman's jaw tightened. "Until 2 months ago. When you bought the club." Sadie swallowed hard. "I've been working here since before you took over. When you came in for the inspection, I saw your face." "And you recognized me?" "Yes." Roman picked up the photo again. He studied it. His thumb rubbed over the creased edge. "This picture is old. I was 19, maybe 20. It was taken outside O'Malley's pub on 4th Street. Place burned down a decade ago." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "You look like you're barely old enough to drink. You weren't hanging around O'Malley's 10 years ago." "I wasn't," Sadie admitted. The cold air was biting through her damp shirt. She started to shiver. It was a violent, uncontrollable tremor that started in her core and rattled out to her fingertips. She hated that he could see it. She hated that she looked like prey. "So where did you get it?" Sadie looked at the photograph. It was her only copy. She had carried it every day for 5 years, ever since she found it in a shoebox at the bottom of her foster mother's closet. The glossy paper was soft at the edges from how many times she had run her thumb over it. "It's mine," she said defensively. A tiny spark of anger finally flared in her chest, cutting through the thick fog of terror. "It belongs to me," Roman scoffed. It was a harsh, dismissive sound. "You're a bad liar, kid. You're shaking so hard you're about to crack a tooth. You have 10 seconds to tell me who your handler is, or I'm calling my guys in here. They aren't as polite as I am." He reached for the black telephone on his desk. Wait! Sadie lunged forward, hitting her hip hard against the edge of the desk. The pain was sharp, but she ignored it. She slapped her hand down on the wood inches from the phone. Don't! Please! I swear to God, no one sent me. I'm not a spy. I don't care about your business or the club or whatever illegal things you do. I just wash the floors. Roman's hand hovered over the receiver. He looked at her hand on his desk, the yellow dish glove stained with bleach and dirty water trembling violently. Then he looked at her face. For the first time, a flicker of genuine confusion crossed his features. It wasn't pity, but it was a break in the cold, calculated mafia facade. He was trying to solve a puzzle, and the pieces weren't fitting. A hardened spy wouldn't be crying. And Sadie was crying. She hadn't even realized it until a hot tear broke free and tracked down her cheek, leaving a clean streak through the dust and sweat on her face. She furiously wiped her face with the back of her wrist, smearing grime across her cheekbone. Then why? Roman said, his voice dropping a fraction of a decibel, losing some of its aggressive edge. Do you carry a picture of me? Sadie took a ragged breath. The air in her lungs felt like glass. She looked at the photograph on the desk. She looked at the young, bruised version of the man standing in front of her. Because, Sadie whispered, her voice rough and hollow, I don't care about you. You're just in the way. Roman frowned, a deep crease forming between his eyes. What? Sadie reached out with a trembling, gloved finger. She didn't point at the young Roman Vargo in the foreground, standing under the streetlight with his cigarette. She pointed to the background, to the blurred, shadowed window of the diner behind him. There, she said, her voice breaking completely. Roman leaned closer. He squinted at the dark, grainy background of the photograph. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the poor lighting of the old film. Through the rain-streaked glass of the diner window, partially obscured by the glare of a passing car's headlights, sat a girl. She was in a booth, facing outward. Her face was out of focus, a smear of pale skin and dark hair. Who is that? Roman asked softly. Her name is Anna, Sadie said. The name tasted like ash on her tongue. She was my older sister. Silence expanded in the freezing office, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the relentless rattle of the air conditioning unit. Roman stared at the photograph. He picked it up again, bringing it closer to his face. The muscles in his jaw worked, ticking rhythmically under his skin. Your sister. Yes, Sadie said. She pulled her hand back, crossing her arms tightly over her chest to suppress the shivering. That photo is the last time anyone ever saw her. Roman slowly lowered the picture. The hostility in his posture hadn't vanished, but it had mutated. It was no longer the sharp, pointed aggression of a predator cornering a threat. It was a tense, coiled stillness. He looked at Sadie, really looking at her this time. He took in the messy, dark hair, the hollows of her cheeks, the slight overbite. He was looking for the ghost in the photograph. 10 years ago. Roman said, his voice flat. 9 years and 8 months. Sadie corrected automatically. The timeline was burned into her frontal lobe. October 14th. It was a Tuesday. She was supposed to pick me up from my group home at 8 o'clock. She never showed. Roman turned the photo over. The back was blank, save for a faint blue watermark from the developer. How did you get this? The police, Sadie said. A bitter, cynical smile twisted her lips. It was an ugly expression, but it felt genuine. They found a roll of film dropped in the alley behind O'Malley's a week after she went missing. A tourist must have dropped it. The cops developed it hoping for a clue. This was the last exposure on the roll. She paused, swallowing the lump of emotion that always rose when she talked about this. She hated crying in front of men like him, men who held all the power. They gave me a copy. She continued, her voice hardening. They told me it was a dead end. The diner was closed when the picture was taken. She was just sitting in there waiting for someone. The police couldn't identify the guy in the foreground. They said it was just some street kid. They closed the case after 6 months, classified her as a runaway. Roman's eyes locked onto hers. The flat, dull brown was suddenly sharp, piercing. But you didn't. Anna wouldn't run away without me, Sadie said fiercely. Her voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls. She promised. We were going to go to California. She had bus tickets. Roman tossed the photo back onto the desk. It landed with a soft slap. So you've been carrying this around for a decade looking for the street kid. I look at every face. Sadie confessed the exhaustion of her obsession finally bleeding into her words. Her shoulders slumped. Every time I walk down the street, every time I serve a table or mop a floor, I look at jaws and noses and scars. I memorized the way you stood. I didn't know your name. I didn't know you were Roman Vargo. Until 2 months ago. Yes. Roman walked around the desk. Sadie immediately tensed, taking a half step backward, but he didn't reach for her. He bypassed her, walking to a small wet bar in the corner of the office. He grabbed a heavy crystal glass and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid from a decanter. He didn't offer her any. He drank it neat in one long swallow. You found me, Roman said, keeping his back to her as he set the glass down. Why didn't you come to me? Why sneak around washing my floors with my face in your pocket? Are you kidding me? Sadie choked out. She gestured wildly around the opulent, intimidating office. Look at you. You're a mob boss. People whisper your name like a curse out there. What was I supposed to do? Walk up to your security guards and say, "Excuse me, Mr. Vargo might have murdered my sister 10 years ago. Can I ask him a few questions?" They would have shot me in the alley. Roman turned around. He leaned against the bar, crossing his ankles. The harsh overhead light caught the faint scar through his eyebrow. Did I? He asked quietly. Sadie's breath hitched. Did you what? Murder your sister? The bluntness of the question felt like a physical blow. Sadie stared at him. Her heart, which had just begun to settle, kicked into overdrive again. She looked at his large, calloused hands, hands that had undoubtedly ended lives. She had spent years imagining this moment. She had practiced speeches in the mirror of her dingy apartment. She had imagined screaming at him, demanding answers, beating her fists against his chest. But reality was stark. Reality smelled like ammonia and stale smoke. Reality was cold. I don't know, Sadie whispered. The truth felt pathetic. I don't think so. In the picture, you're looking down the street. You're not looking at her. You look like you're guarding the door. A muscle twitched in Roman's jaw. He pushed off the bar and walked slowly back to the desk. He didn't look at Sadie. He looked down at the photograph. He stared at it for a long, agonizing minute. The silence stretched so tight, Sadie thought it might snap and take her head off. Finally, Roman reached out. He placed his index finger over the blurry face of Anna in the diner window. It was raining, Roman said. His voice sounded distant, detached, like he was reading a weather report from a past life. October, freezing rain. I remember the night. Sadie's knees gave out. She didn't collapse entirely, but she sank into the leather armchair she had been hiding behind. The leather was cold against her damp jeans. You remember, she breathed. I remember, Roman said. He lifted his gaze from the photo. The hostility was completely gone, replaced by a dark, fathomless shadow. Because I didn't kill her, Sadie, but I know exactly who did. Oxygen felt entirely useless. Sadie dragged a harsh breath into her lungs, but her blood felt thick and slow, heavy as wet cement. She sat perfectly still in the oversized leather armchair, staring at the scuffed toe of her left sneaker. A tiny bead of dirty mop water had dried on the rubber, leaving a grey ring. She focused on that ring. If she looked at Roman, she would shatter. "Who?" The word tasted like copper. It scraped against her throat, barely a whisper over the steady mechanical rattle of the air conditioning. Roman didn't answer immediately. He picked up his crystal glass, swirling the last few amber drops at the bottom. The clinking of ice against glass was sharp, violently loud in the quiet office. He was deciding how much to say, how much of his own filth he was willing to expose to a bucket girl who smelled of industrial bleach. "I was 20, Roman finally said. His voice was a flat, gravelly baritone, stripped of the threatening edge it carried earlier. Now it just sounded exhausted. "I was a street soldier, a nobody. I collected envelopes, broke fingers when people were short, and stood by doors so the people inside wouldn't be disturbed." Sadie kept her eyes on her shoe. Who was inside the diner? Dominic Russo. The name meant nothing to her. It was just syllables, but the way Roman said it like a curse he was trying to spit out told her enough. Russo owned the diner. Roman continued pacing slowly behind his desk. The heavy oak floorboards didn't dare creak under his weight. He used it after hours to settle disputes. That night a sit-down was scheduled with a crew from the south side. I was told to stand outside, smoke my cigarettes, and make sure nobody walked in. Anna was already inside. Sadie whispered. She didn't mean to interrupt, but the words spilled out. The memory of that night was a festering wound she had picked at for a decade. She told me she was going to wait at the diner down the street from my group home. It was pouring. She didn't want to wait at the bus stop. Roman stopped pacing. He leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms over his chest. The front door was locked, but the side door by the kitchen. The latch was broken. Russo always meant to get it fixed. A girl walked in out of the rain, shook out her umbrella, sat in the back booth. Sadie squeezed her eyes shut. She could see it. Anna, shivering in a cheap denim jacket, sliding into the vinyl booth, rubbing her hands together for warmth. Waiting for Sadie's curfew to end so she could sneak her out. "I saw her through the window," Roman said. His tone was clinical, detached. "I tapped on the glass. I motioned for her to leave. We weren't open, but she just pointed at her watch and mouthed that she was waiting for someone. Why didn't you make her leave?" Sadie's head snapped up. The numbness cracked, giving way to a sudden, blinding spike of rage. "You were the guard. Why didn't you drag her out?" Roman met her furious gaze without flinching. His brown eyes were completely dead. "Because Russo's car pulled up to the curb. He walked in the front. If I had gone inside to deal with the stray kid, I wouldn't have been at my post. Russo would have punished me." "So you let her sit there?" "I thought Russo would just kick her out." Roman pushed away from the desk and walked over to the small wet bar. He didn't pour another drink. He just gripped the edge of the marble counter. His knuckles were white. The South Side crew arrived 10 minutes later. He said to the mirror behind the bar. "Things went bad. The dispute didn't get settled. Guns were drawn." "No." Sadie choked out. She clamped her hands over her ears, a childish, futile gesture to stop the words. But Roman's voice was too heavy. It slid right through the cracks in her fingers. "Russo shot the South Side boss in the chest." Roman said his words coming faster, now a grim recitation of a nightmare he had memorized. It was loud. The whole street echoed. I turned around and looked through the window. The girl in the booth had stood up. She was screaming, though I couldn't hear it over the rain. She had seen the whole thing. Sadie dug her fingernails into her own scalp. The cheap rubber band holding her hair snapped, sending a tangled, dark mess falling over her face. She couldn't breathe. The oxygen was gone. "Russo turned around," Roman finished. The silence that followed the sentence was absolute. "Stop!" Sadie sobbed, bending over at the waist, pressing her face against her knees. "Stop, please." He didn't hesitate. Roman said softly, ignoring her plea. He wasn't telling her to hurt her. He was telling her because the truth was a tumor, and she had demanded he cut it out. He shot her twice. Then he told the kitchen staff to roll her up in the carpet and put her in the meat freezer until they could take the bodies out to the salvage yard. A high, thin sound ripped out of Sadie's throat. It didn't sound human. It sounded like an animal caught in a snare gnawing off its own leg. She pitched forward, slipping out of the leather chair entirely, and hit her knees on the hard floor. 10 years. 10 years of staring at faces in the crowd. 10 years of jumping every time the phone rang. 10 years of hoping that Anna had just gotten scared, that she had run away to California like they planned, and was just waiting for the right time to send for her. Dead. She had been dead before Sadie even noticed she was late. The nausea hit her with the force of a physical blow. Sadie scrambled forward on her hands and knees, practically tearing the expensive metal wastebasket out from under Roman's desk. She retched violently into it. Her stomach was empty. She hadn't eaten since a stale bagel at dawn, so she only heaved up bitter, burning acid. She coughed, gagging on her own saliva, tears streaming down her dirty face. She stayed hunched over the trash can, spitting, shivering so hard her teeth clicked together. She expected Roman to yell, to tell her she was ruining his office, to kick her out. Instead, a crisp white linen square dropped onto the floor beside her hand. Sadie stared at the handkerchief. She slowly looked up. Roman was standing a few feet away, looking down at her. His expression was impossible to read. It wasn't pity. Mafia bosses didn't feel pity. But it wasn't disgust either. It was a dark, heavy recognition. Like he was watching someone drown in the exact same ocean he was already buried under. "Wipe your mouth," Roman said. Cold linoleum, cold leather, cold marble. Everything in Roman Vargo's world was freezing, designed to preserve the corpses he left in his wake. Sadie picked up the linen handkerchief with a trembling, yellow-gloved hand. She wiped her mouth, leaving a smear of bile and dirt on the pristine white fabric. She didn't stand up. Her legs were entirely devoid of muscle or bone. She sat on the floor, leaning back against the side of the mahogany desk, pulling her knees tight against her chest. She didn't cry. The violent sobbing fit had burned itself out as quickly as it had ignited, leaving behind a hollow, ringing emptiness. It felt as though someone had scooped out her organs with a rusted spoon. "Dominic Russo," she said. Her voice was raspy, stripped of all its youthful panic. It sounded old. "Is he still alive?" Roman walked back around his desk and sat in his heavy leather chair. He looked at her over the rim of the desk like a judge presiding over a particularly pathetic defendant. "He is." "Where?" Roman let out a short, humorless breath. "Don't be stupid, kid." "Where is he?" Sadie repeated, turning her head to glare up at him. The yellow dish gloves squeaked as she balled her hands into fists. "He runs the docks out of the East End," Roman said, resting his forearms on the desk. "He has 300 men on his payroll. He owns half the judges in the city, the police commissioner, and a private security detail that could rival the Secret Service. You think you're going to march down there with your mop bucket and demand justice? You let it happen." Sadie hissed, her voice vibrating with sudden venomous hatred. She pointed a trembling finger at him. "You stood by the door. You guarded the street while he killed her." "I did," Roman agreed smoothly. He didn't flinch. He didn't offer excuses. The sheer lack of defensiveness infuriated her even more. "And if I had walked in there and tried to stop a made man from tying up a loose end, there would have been 2 bodies rolled up in that carpet. That's the world. That's your world, not hers." "Our worlds collided," Roman said, "and hers lost. That's the tragedy of it. But don't look at me and think I'm losing sleep over it. I've done worse things than stand by a door since then." Sadie stared at him. She believed him. The man sitting across from her wasn't the scared 20-year-old kid in the photograph anymore. He was a monster who had climbed to the top of a mountain of corpses, and he was completely comfortable with the view. "So why tell me?" Sadie asked. Her throat throbbed. "You could have just shot me, or fired me. Why tell the bucket girl the truth?" Roman picked up the creased photograph again. He stared at the blurry figure in the diner window. "Because I don't work for Dominic Russo anymore." Sadie frowned, her grief temporarily muddied by confusion. "I don't understand. 3 years ago I split from the Russo family." Roman said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly register. "It wasn't a friendly divorce. Russo tried to put a bullet in my head. I took half his territory instead. We've been at war ever since." He tossed the photo back toward her. It fluttered in the air, conditioning landing softly on the floor by her sneaker. "I didn't kill your sister Sadie, but I watched the man who did," Roman said. He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a predatory intensity. "I owe Russo a debt. You owe Russo a debt. I'm going to kill him. It might be tomorrow, it might be in 6 months, but I will tear his empire down to the studs and I will put him in the ground." Sadie stopped breathing. She looked from the photograph on the floor to the Mafia Boss sitting in the chair. The edges of her reality were warping. "Get up," Roman commanded softly. Sadie grabbed the edge of the desk and hauled herself up. Her joints screamed. She stood swaying on her feet, the soiled handkerchief still clutched in her hand. "Go to the locker room," Roman instructed, his tone brisk and businesslike again. "Take off that apron. Throw the gloves in the trash. You don't wash floors anymore." Sadie blinked, her exhausted brain struggling to process the sudden shift. "What?" "I'm currently fighting a war," Roman said, checking the silver watch on his wrist. "My club gets audited twice a week by cops Russo pays off. My supply lines are being hit. I have a leak in my organization, and I can't trust half the men standing outside my door." He looked back up at her. "But I know exactly who you are. And I know exactly what you want. I want my sister back." Sadie whispered, her voice cracking. "You can't have her." Roman replied, brutal and immediate. "She's gone. What you can have is the man who pulled the trigger." He reached into the top drawer of his desk, pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills wrapped in a rubber band, and tossed it onto the wood. It hit with a heavy thud. "Take the money," Roman said. "Go home. Pay your rent. Buy some clothes that don't smell like bleach. Come back here tomorrow at 9 in the morning. You're going to work for me directly." Sadie stared at the stack of cash. It was more money than she made in 6 months of scrubbing toilets. It looked filthy. Doing what? Roman's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. It was a grim acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation. "You're invisible. People ignore cleaners. They ignore waitresses. They talk in front of you because they think you're furniture." He leaned back in his chair. "Russo has a charity gala next week at the Continental Hotel. I need someone on the inside who isn't on his radar. I need a ghost." Sadie took a step back. The door behind her felt miles away. "You want me to spy for you? I want you to help me find his throat," Roman corrected quietly. "And then I'll let you watch me cut it." The offer hung in the freezing air, toxic and seductive. Sadie knew she should run. She should walk out of the office, throw her gloves away, and get on a bus to anywhere else. Roman Vargo was dragging her into a meat grinder. If Russo caught her, he wouldn't hesitate to put her in a carpet next to Anna. But as Sadie looked down at the photograph, at the blurry, faceless smudge of her sister, trapped forever behind rain-streaked glass, a cold, terrifying calm washed over her. The frantic, hopeful girl who had carried that picture for 10 years had died 5 minutes ago, vomiting into a trash can. The girl left behind had absolutely nothing left to lose. Sadie reached out. Her yellow-gloved fingers closed over the stack of cash. 9 o'clock, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Roman watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. 9 o'clock. Don't be late. Paper cuts from $100 bills stung exactly like the ones from singles. Sadie sat on the edge of her unmade mattress, staring at her thumb. A thin bead of crimson welled up from the crease in her skin. Her apartment smelled of boiled cabbage from the hallway and the damp, sour mildew that lived permanently in the walls. The stack of cash Roman had tossed on his desk now sat on her mismatched thrift store quilt. It was $10,000. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dark, grainy window of the diner. She heard the imaginary, muffled scream of a sister she had spent a decade searching for. The grief wasn't a clean, sharp puncture wound. It was a blunt force trauma, leaving her bruised, heavy, and completely numb. By 8:45 a.m., she was standing in the alley behind the Copper Lounge. Daylight did the club no favors. Without the neon and the shadows, it was just a brick building bleeding the stench of stale beer and vomit into the morning air. She pushed open the heavy steel security door. It groaned on its hinges. The main floor was empty, save for a guy pushing a wide broom across the sticky dance floor. He didn't even look up as she walked past. She was already practicing. Be invisible. Roman's office door was unlocked. Sadie pushed it open. Roman was sitting behind his desk, a phone pressed to his ear. His eyes focused on a ledger. He looked exactly as he had last night, though he wore a fresh white shirt, the top 2 buttons undone. He didn't acknowledge her entrance immediately. He held up a single finger, demanding silence, and continued his conversation in rapid, low Italian. Sadie stood by the door. She looked at the trash can where she had lost her dignity 12 hours prior. It was empty. A fresh plastic liner was tucked neatly over the rim. Tonight, Roman said into the phone, switching to English. His voice was a rasp that dragged over the syllables. If he moves the shipment early, burn the truck. I don't care who's driving it. He hung up, dropping the receiver into its cradle with a sharp clack. He looked up at Sadie. His brown eyes scanned her. She had worn her only nice clothes, a black turtleneck that had faded to a dark grey, and a pair of dark jeans without any holes. You look exactly like a bucket girl trying to dress up, Roman observed. It wasn't an insult, it was an inventory. I bought coffee, Sadie said defensively, though she hadn't. Her hands were empty. She didn't know why she said it. The adrenaline of being in his presence again was short-circuiting her brain. Roman ignored the lie. He gestured to a garment bag hanging from the coat rack in the corner. Take that to the bathroom. Put it on. If the shoes don't fit, tell Victor outside he'll find a pair that does. Sadie walked over to the bag. She unzipped it. Inside was a pristine, tailored black vest, a crisp white button-down shirt, and a pair of black slacks. A heavy silver name tag rested in the bottom of the bag. It read, Catering Staff, Continental Hotel. You got me a job, she murmured. I bought a catering company. Roman corrected. He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. The stubble there made a dry, scratching sound. 2 hours ago, the original staff assigned to Russo's VIP section suddenly came down with acute food poisoning. You are the replacement. Sadie pulled the uniform out. The fabric was stiff, smelling heavily of industrial starch. What exactly am I supposed to do? You're going to serve champagne, Roman said. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand entirely too close to her. The smell of his bitter espresso and ozone overpowered the starch of the uniform. And you're going to plant a microphone under the center table of the private mezzanine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, flat, black disc, no larger than a quarter. He held it out on his palm. Russo holds court at the gala. Roman explained, his voice dropping into that quiet, terrifying register that demanded absolute focus. He thinks he's untouchable there. He meets with his distributors, his politicians, his judges. I need to know exactly who is in his pocket. If I cut his legs out from under him, I need to know whose legs I'm chopping off." Sadie stared at the little black bug. She reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed against the calloused heat of his palm. He didn't pull away. "If he catches me," she asked, "he'll take you to the basement of the hotel." Roman said bluntly. "He'll use pliers to pull your teeth out one by one to see who you work for. Then he'll shoot you." A cold sweat broke out at the base of Sadie's neck. She looked up into Roman's face. She searched for a flicker of reassurance, a lie to make her feel better. There was none. He was offering her the unfiltered, brutal reality of his existence. "You can back out," Roman said softly. "Walk away, Sadie. Take the 10 grand. Disappear." "No." The word left her mouth before her brain could authorize it. She curled her fingers around the bug, digging the hard plastic edge into her palm to ground herself. "I want to see him." Roman stared at her for a long, heavy moment. He wasn't looking at a cleaner anymore. He was looking at a weapon he had just finished loading. "Go get dressed," he said. Crystal glasses chimed like tiny, frantic bells. The grand ballroom of the Continental Hotel was a sensory assault. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, battling against the heavy, booming laughter of men wearing $10,000 tuxedos. The air was thick-choked with the cloying scent of hundreds of white roses imported for the centerpieces, mixing with expensive, musky perfumes and the underlying metallic smell of chafing dish fuel. Sadie stood by the service doors, a silver tray, balanced precariously on her left hand. 6 flutes of champagne trembled slightly on the polished metal. Her feet were already screaming. The black service shoes Victor had procured were half a size too small, pinching her toes with every step. The starchy collar of the white shirt dug into her neck. But physical discomfort was irrelevant. It was background noise compared to the violent drumming of her heart. Thump, thump, thump. "Tray 7, move." A harsh whisper crackled in the tiny, flesh-colored earpiece hidden beneath her messy, dark hair. It was Victor stationed somewhere in a surveillance van a block away. Sadie stepped forward. She merged into the sea of silk dresses and tailored suits. She kept her eyes downcast, painting a bland, subservient mask on her face. Roman had been right. Nobody looked at her. To these people she wasn't a human being, she was a mobile table. They snatched glasses off her tray without pausing their conversations, without making eye contact. Invisible. "He's entering the floor." Victor's voice buzzed in her ear. "Moving to the mezzanine. Go, Sadie." Sadie's breath hitched. She turned her head toward the grand staircase. Dominic Rosso didn't look like a monster. He didn't look like a man who ordered teenagers rolled up in carpets. He looked like a wealthy grandfather. He had thick, swept-back silver hair, a deep tan, and a warm, easy smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He was wearing a deep burgundy velvet dinner jacket. As he walked up the velvet-roped stairs to the private VIP mezzanine, he patted a city councilman on the shoulder and laughed. It was a rich, booming laugh. A wave of pure, unadulterated nausea hit Sadie so hard she stumbled. The champagne flutes rattled dangerously against each other. Her vision narrowed the edges, blurring into black static. That laugh, that warm, charming face. This was the man who had erased Anna from the earth over a broken door latch. She wanted to scream. She wanted to drop the tray, grab one of the heavy steak knives from the carving station, and bury it in his throat. The urge was so intensely physical that her fingers twitched. "Breathe, kid." Roman's voice suddenly replaced Victor's in her earpiece. It was low, steady, and shockingly close. "He's just a man in a suit. Walk up the stairs. Do the job." Roman was in the building. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be across town establishing an alibi. But hearing his voice, the rough, grating anchor of it, snapped Sadie out of her panic. She forced air into her lungs. "Yes." She breathed so softly no one around her could hear. She adjusted her grip on the tray and moved toward the staircase. Two massive men in dark suits blocked the entrance. They looked at her tray, then at the name tag pinned to her chest. "Refreshments for Mr. Russo," Sadie said. Her voice was flat, devoid of tremor. She was channeling the deadness she had seen in Roman's eyes. The guard on the left nodded and stepped aside. Sadie ascended the stairs. The mezzanine was a semicircular balcony overlooking the ballroom, furnished with plush velvet couches and a heavy, low mahogany coffee table in the center. Russo was sitting on the main couch, unbuttoning his jacket. Three other men sat around him, leaning in close. "Bring that over here, sweetheart," Russo said, gesturing to her, without looking up from his conversation. Sadie walked toward the table. The black bug was taped to the underside of her left index finger. She had to place it under the lip of the heavy table as she set the drinks down. She reached the table. Russo was less than 2 feet away. She could smell his cologned sandalwood and something sharp like peppermint. He was talking about a shipping container coming into the port on Tuesday. Sadie bent her knees. She lowered the tray. Her hand shook. It wasn't a small tremor. It was a violent spasm of adrenaline and terror. The crystal base of a champagne flute clinked loudly against the silver tray. Russo stopped talking. He looked up. His eyes, unlike his warm smile, were a pale, freezing blue. They locked onto Sadie's face. The grandfatherly illusion shattered instantly, revealing the cold reptilian predator underneath. "You're shaking," Russo said. The temperature on the mezzanine seemed to drop 20 degrees. The three men around him fell dead silent, their hands subtly shifting toward the inside of their jackets. Sadie froze, bent halfway over the table. The black bug was pressed between her finger and the tray, inches from the mahogany lip. If she pulled away now, she failed. If she reached under the table, he would see her. Sadie swallowed. She looked into the eyes of the man who killed her sister. She didn't invent a lie. She used the truth. "I'm sorry, sir. My shoes are too tight. They're cutting my feet." Russo stared at her for a long, agonizing second. He looked down at her feet. He saw the cheap, stiff black leather pinching her heels, the slight redness around her ankles. A slow, patronizing smile spread across his face. The tension evaporated. "They work these kids to the bone." Russo chuckled, looking at his associates. He reached out and plucked a glass from her tray. "Set it down, sweetheart. Go take 5 minutes in the back." "Thank you, sir," Sadie whispered. She leaned down further to place the rest of the glasses on the table. As the edge of the silver tray met the mahogany, she slipped her left finger underneath the table's lip. She pressed hard. The adhesive on the bug caught the wood. She slid her finger away, leaving the device hidden in the shadows. She stood up, pulling the empty tray to her chest, and bowed her head. She turned and walked away, her spine rigid, waiting for the shout, waiting for a hand to grab her shoulder, waiting for the bullet. She reached the top of the stairs and began her descent. "It's live." Roman's voice murmured in her ear, a low hum of approval. "Good girl, get out of there." Sadie hit the main floor of the ballroom and let out a shaky breath. She had done it. She had touched the monster and walked away. But as she moved toward the service kitchen, the heavy service doors swung open. A man stepped out, blocking her path. He wasn't a waiter. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, and a faint, pale scar sliced through his left eyebrow. Roman grabbed her by the elbow, his grip bruisingly tight, and pulled her into the dark, narrow service hallway, out of sight of the ballroom. He slammed her back against the cool tile wall, his body caging her in. "You did good," he growled, his face inches from hers. His eyes were wild, burning with a chaotic energy she hadn't seen before. "But we have a problem." "What problem?" Sadie gasped. The silver tray slipped from her numb fingers, clattering loudly against the floorboards. Roman pressed a hand over her mouth. His palm tasted of salt and sweat. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the heavy swinging doors leading back to the ballroom. The brass hinges groaned slightly. Victor went dark. Roman breathed his voice a low vibration against her cheek. Russo's perimeter sweep found the van. They have him, which means Russo knows the room is bugged and he knows I didn't send a professional. Sadie's stomach dropped out. The adrenaline that had carried her through the mezzanine curdled into a cold, heavy lump of dread. If they had Victor, they had the feed. They knew a waitress planted it. They're locking the doors, Roman said, finally pulling his hand away from her mouth. He reached beneath the tailored fit of his charcoal suit jacket. When his hand emerged, it was wrapped around the matte black grip of a semi-automatic pistol. He didn't check the chamber. He didn't cock it with a dramatic click. He just held it down against his thigh, the barrel pointed at the floor tiles. The sheer casual familiarity he had with the weapon was more terrifying than the gun itself. "Take off the apron," he ordered. "Now." Sadie fumbled with the knot at the small of her back. Her fingers felt like thick sausages. She tore the fabric loose, letting the starchy white apron pool around her ankles. "Walk behind me. Keep your hands flat against my back. If I stop, you stop. If I shoot, you close your eyes and cover your ears." He pushed off the wall. He didn't run. Running attracted attention. He moved with a terrifying predatory glide down the narrow hallway, pushing through the swinging double doors that led into the hotel's main prep kitchen. The heat hit them instantly. It was a suffocating wall of steam, smelling violently of roasted beef, burnt garlic, and industrial dish soap. 30 people were moving in a chaotic, synchronized rush. Knives chopped against wooden boards with a rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack. Waiters shouted ticket orders in Spanish and English. Nobody noticed the man with the gun immediately. Roman charted a path through the stainless steel prep tables, weaving past a towering rack of clean dinner plates. Sadie pressed her palms flat against his back. The muscles beneath his suit jacket were coiled tight as bridge cables. She kept her head down, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. They were halfway to the loading dock exit when the kitchen doors banged open behind them. "Hey, you!" The voice was a harsh, barking command that cut through the clatter of pots and pans. Sadie couldn't help it. She looked back over her shoulder. 2 men in dark, ill-fitting suits were storming down the central aisle. The man in the front had his hand inside his coat. He wasn't looking at Roman. He was staring directly at Sadie's white button-down shirt. Russo's men. "Keep moving!" Roman snarled. He didn't look back. He grabbed a heavy metal utility cart loaded with dirty pots and shoved it violently into the aisle behind them. It crashed into a prep station, sending a massive vat of boiling chicken stock cascading across the slip-resistant red tiles. The first pursuer slipped. His leather shoes found no traction in the greasy broth. He went down hard, his jaw clipping the corner of the metal table with a sickening, wet crack. Screams erupted. The synchronized chaos of the kitchen dissolved into pure, frantic panic. Chefs dropped their knives. Waiters scrambled for the exits. The second man didn't slip. He vaulted over his bleeding partner, pulling a snub-nosed revolver from his jacket. He raised the gun. Roman turned. He didn't aim. He didn't hesitate. He raised his pistol and fired twice. Bang, bang! In the enclosed, tiled space of the kitchen, the noise was catastrophic. It didn't sound like a movie. It sounded like the world tearing in half. The physical pressure of the sound waves punched Sadie in the chest. Her ears instantly rang, with a high, piercing whine drowning out the screams around her. The man with the revolver jerked backward, crashing into a rack of hanging copper pans. They rained down around him in a deafening metallic clatter as he slid to the floor, leaving a bright, smeared streak of crimson against the stainless steel refrigerator door. "Move!" Roman roared, his voice barely penetrating the ringing in Sadie's ears. He grabbed her arm, hauling her forward. They hit the heavy steel emergency exit doors. Roman threw his weight against the push bar. The door flew open, and the freezing night air slammed into them. It was raining. A hard-driving downpour that instantly soaked Sadie's starchy shirt, pasting it to her skin. The alley was pitch black, illuminated only by the faint, flickering amber glow of a distant street lamp. The smell of wet asphalt and rotting garbage rushed up to meet them. "My car," Roman said, pointing the gun down the alley. "Black sedan, end of the block." Sadie's legs moved on autopilot. Her lungs burned. The tight black shoes dug into her heels, scraping the skin raw with every step. She tasted blood in the back of her throat. They were 10 yards from the car when a shadow detached itself from the brick wall beside them. It was a third man. He had been waiting by the exit. He lunged out of the darkness, blindsiding Roman. He didn't use a gun. He drove a heavy serrated hunting knife upward, aiming for Roman's ribs. Roman caught the man's wrist at the very last second, but the momentum carried them both into a stack of wooden shipping pallets. The wood splintered with a sharp crack. Roman's gun skittered across the wet pavement, sliding under a nearby dumpster. Sadie froze. The rain plastered her hair to her face. She watched the two men grapple in the mud, a tangled mass of dark suits and violent grunting exertion. The man was bigger than Roman. He pressed his weight down, forcing the tip of the knife closer to Roman's throat. "Run!" Her brain screamed the command. "He told you to run!" She looked down the alley. The street was empty. She could disappear. She could take the $10,000 on her bed and vanish into the night. She owed Roman nothing. He was a monster. He had stood by a door while her sister died. But as Roman's head snapped back against the brick wall, blood welling from a split lip, Sadie saw the diner window again. She saw the rain. She saw the men in suits doing exactly what they wanted, tearing lives apart and leaving the pieces to rot in freezers. Something broke inside her. It was a cold, jagged snap. Sadie dropped to her knees. She dragged her hands blindly through the greasy, freezing puddles of the alleyway. Her fingers brushed against cold metal. She gripped the handle of Roman's discarded pistol. It was incredibly heavy. She stood up. Her arms shook so violently she could barely lift the weapon. She stepped forward, her shoes squelching in the mud. "Hey!" Sadie choked out. Her voice was thin, completely swallowed by the rain. She stepped closer. She pressed the cold metal barrel directly against the back of the attacker's thigh. The man froze. He looked back over his shoulder. Water dripped from his nose. He looked at the soaking wet, terrified girl holding the gun. He opened his mouth to laugh. Sadie pulled the trigger. The gun bucked violently in her hands. The recoil sent a shockwave of pain up her wrists, nearly tearing the weapon from her grip. The man screamed. It was a ragged, high-pitched wail. His leg gave out instantly, the kneecap shattering under the hollow point round. He collapsed sideways into the garbage, clutching his leg, writhing in the mud. Roman didn't pause to stare. He rolled to his feet, gasping for air. He ripped the gun from Sadie's trembling hands, grabbed her by the collar of her soaked shirt, and dragged her toward the black sedan. He keyed the unlock button, threw open the passenger door, and shoved her inside. He ran around the hood, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed the car into drive. The tires shrieked against the wet pavement, burning rubber before finding traction. They tore out of the alley, merging recklessly into the midnight traffic. The heater blasted hot, dry air through the vents, smelling heavily of dust and melting plastic. Sadie sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead at the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. Swoosh thump. Swoosh thump. The neon lights of the city smeared across the glass like wet oil paint. She was covered in mud. Her knuckles were scraped and bleeding. The gunshot still echoed in her ears, a phantom ringing that refused to fade. She looked down at her hands. The yellow dish gloves were gone. She had pulled a trigger. She had put a bullet into a man's flesh. The phantom recoil still hummed in her bones. "Are you hit?" Roman asked. His voice was hoarse. He was gripping the steering wheel with his left hand. His right hand was pressed hard against his ribs. The fabric of his shirt was torn, and a dark, heavy stain was spreading across the charcoal wool. The knife had caught him. "No," Sadie whispered. She didn't look at him. She looked at her trembling hands. "I shot him." "In the leg." Roman grunted, wincing as he took a sharp turn down an empty industrial road. "He'll live. Probably with a limp, but he'll live. I shot a man." "You saved my life." "I wasn't trying to save you." Sadie finally turned her head. She looked at Roman's bruised face, illuminated by the green glow of the dashboard. "I just wanted to stop him. I just wanted them to stop." Roman pulled the car into a dark, abandoned parking garage under an overpass. The heavy concrete ceiling blocked out the rain. The silence was sudden and absolute, save for the ticking of the cooling engine. He killed the headlights. He took his hand away from his ribs. The cut wasn't deep, a shallow slice along the oblique, but it bled sluggishly. He reached into the glove compartment, pulled out a clean rag, and pressed it against his side. He turned in his seat to look at her. He didn't see the bucket girl anymore. He saw a ghost who had just learned how to haunt. "You crossed the line, Sadie," Roman said quietly. The smell of his blood mixed with the bitter scent of gunpowder in the confined space. "You don't get to go back to scrubbing floors after tonight. You shot one of Russo's men. You are in the game now." Sadie swallowed hard. The metallic taste of fear was entirely gone, replaced by an empty, sprawling exhaustion. She leaned her head back against the leather headrest. It felt soft, expensive. "Did we get it?" she asked. Roman frowned. "Get what?" "The bug." Sadie turned her head. Her dark eyes were entirely devoid of tears. The girl who had cried in his office 12 hours ago was dead. "Did Victor hear anything before they took him?" Roman stared at her for a long time. The harsh lines of his face softened just for a fraction of a second, revealing a deeply buried, tragic recognition. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He tapped the screen and held it up. A green audio file was cued. Victor recorded 10 minutes before they found the van. Roman said, his voice dropping into a low, reverent rumble. "It uploaded to the cloud automatically. We have Russo talking about the port commissioner. We have names. We have bank accounts." Sadie stared at the little green line on the screen. It was the key. It was the match that would burn Dominic Russo's empire to the ground. "Play it," she said. Roman hit play. Russo's booming grandfatherly voice filled the quiet car. Sadie closed her eyes. The sound of his voice didn't make her nauseous anymore. It made her angry. It was a cold, precise anger. The kind of anger that built empires and the kind of anger that tore them down. "Tomorrow," Sadie said over the audio playback. "You teach me how to hold the gun properly." Roman lowered the phone. A dark, cynical smile touched the corner of his bloody mouth. It wasn't a happy expression. It was the grim acceptance of a man welcoming another damned soul into hell. "Tomorrow," Roman agreed. He put the car in gear, and they drove out from under the bridge, disappearing completely into the dark, rain-soaked city. The war had just begun. And that is where the blood dries, and the real war begins. Sadie stepped out of the shadows and pulled the trigger, locking herself into Roman Vargo's brutal world. There is no going back now. Will she lose her soul in the pursuit of vengeance, or will she be the one to finally tear Dominic Russo's empire to the ground? If you loved this deep dive into the shadows of the Mafia, you know what to do. Like this video, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single update. Drop a comment below. Do you think Sadie can handle the darkness, or will it consume her?